Welcome to r/malicious compliance, where we share stories of people conforming to the letter, but not the spirit of a request. And today we have 3 great stories, so subscribe, hit the like button, and let's begin. The first story: I got a day off after I refused to work without overtime. The second story: hospital drastically cuts staffing while the volume of patients is increasing. Everybody quits, and the hospital ends up paying out the nose to find adequate staffing. The third story: companies said we couldn't use an accent, so we used our native accent. Today's first story is, that's fine, it'll stop working at 40 hours. About 10 years ago, I was working as a software deployment engineer for the UK branch of a Brazilian company. Owner by a US company, there were 3 of us for the entire world, all based in the UK. Our roles comprised of flying somewhere for a Monday, building configuration and labs in the local US company office, training their staff, updating code if things didn't work, etc., before deploying their first site for them while they watched. They would do the second while you shadowed, and then they'd do the third with you at the hotel but on call. A typical country engagement was 3 to 6 months because you'd be bouncing between anywhere between 4 countries at a time. Each week a different one. Enter new HR manager for Europe. Each week we would blast a timesheet to UK HR to allow them to send it to Brazil, who would bill the US company. Quickly, the new HR manager notices that each of us is clocking in around 30 hours of OT a week, simply because the contract stated the moment we left our houses on a Monday or Sunday that we were now classed as working because of the international travel. We enjoyed this clause because time and a half for 30 hours a week was lovely. But that did mean that the further from the UK we went, the quicker we hit the UK limit of 40 hours per week. My record was hitting 40 hours by lunchtime Tuesday due to spending 27 hours flying to Sydney. As I said, the HR manager didn't like that we were going so far over the 40-hour limit in both our contracts and in the UK. I sat down with her and explained that it was just the nature of the job, that we didn't mind because we got OT for it. She wasn't happy talking about process, and that they wouldn't be paying for OT for over hours from X date. Throughout the meeting, she was abrasive and rude like she was talking to a child. Not the highest billed technical resource in the company. Naturally quite annoyed by this, but very little we could do, the OT wasn't in our contracts as we were salaried employees, and it was a perk that we were given. I grabbed the other 2 in a quick huddle and we formulated a plan. We brief our respective project managers, employee of the US company, and they each agree. The next Monday, A flew to Finland, B flew to Austria, and I flew to Kazakhstan. Naturally, I hit the 40-hour cap quickest, and at mid-morning Wednesday with only half the urgent work completed for the week, I tell the PM I'll pick him and our file maintenance resource when they want before jumping in the car and heading back to the hotel. I text A and B and let them know we're a go. Later on that day, A does the same. All the while, this has been escalated both via my PM and the local company MD back to the US head office, and this back to my Brazil head office and down to our UK office. By Thursday morning my time, I get an email saying they won't pay OT, but will give time off in lieu. Quick text-based huddle and the other 2 are happy with that. I'd prefer the OT, but if I get to an additional 2 days of paid holiday a week to my holiday balance, then I'll take it. We agree, go back to working. HR manager is suitably browbeaten for her mistake, and then even more so when she realizes that time off in lieu has to be taken in a month cycle, meaning each of us had around a week off paid per month. About a year later, we finished the global project for the US firm. Shortly after, they sold the Brazilian company to Capgemini, brought my contract, and I worked directly for them, in a management role for a few years before I went somewhere else. A paid day off every month is very profitable, but on the other hand, the problem is that the company needs you for more hours a week, and they don't just tell you about it because they don't want to pay you for it. Your organization's inflexible policies are not your problem, and allowing the company to use themselves as a flexible temp to mitigate their own bad business practices is a mistake. And of course, given what the staff says, you're on vacation now. What this really means is that your actual direct management will need your duty because the staff won't do your job while you're gone. There will never be a convenient time anyway. A holiday when you're on call is no holiday at all. I left my previous job due to the fact that every fiscal year, they mandatorily required me to agree to receive an advance for the next few months, so they could spend their department's budget. I love the place, loved my job and respected my coworkers, but there was a lot of shenanigans with the money. That wasn't my problem. Now I work for a huge government agency, and I just get paid for each pay period as much as I should get paid. The next story is, deal with it or quit? Fine, it'll only cost you more. This happened last summer. I work with a bunch of different doctors to staff a hospital in the city. Hospitalists and ER docs. Things were going well, and the hospital was raking in record profits and had completed a major expansion because business was increasing. There was a shakeup in the administration of the hospital, and the new folks decided that they needed to make some changes. In order to increase their margins, they decided to cut the number of doctors per shift. They also decided to save money by cutting support staff, thus greatly increasing our non-medical workload, billing, coding, etc. Oh, and by the way, no increase in compensation. Some docs couldn't really find new jobs. Some were up there in years, 65 plus, whereas others had issues on their record that would make it hard to get hired elsewhere. Obviously, these changes didn't go over well. With the hospital expanding, the volume of patients was going up, and we needed more docs. It was in fact endangering patients because the onerous workload would give us less time per patient. Despite our protests, the CEO and CFO were having none of it. They fired the chief medical officer and also got rid of the hospitalist and ER directors. The message was clear: put up or shut up. We had a very contentious meeting, and the CEO basically said that if we can't deal with it, we should quit. Immediately, several doctors quit. Others kept working while looking for new positions. Several of us ended up at rival hospitals right down the road. Initially, the admin kept a brave face as resignations kept coming in. At first, they could manage, but soon we started running into huge staffing issues. They tried quickly hiring new candidates, but people aren't stupid. They knew something was up when they realized so many openings were available. Also, word travels fast in the local medical community. The amount of work they were expecting each doc to do per shift was getting extremely dangerous, making the job less attractive. So winter rolls around and it's the busiest time of the year for any hospital. They desperately need staffing, but they can't find doctors fast enough. So they have no choice but to hire locum tenens doctors, docs who work on short-term contracts. Unfortunately for them, locums actually cost about double what a permanent doctor does. Even they were hard to come by because of how much the job sucked. In addition, they had to offer up huge sign-on bonuses to new hires in order to get people interested. And finally, we come to the part that gives me most satisfaction. They were so desperate that they had to come to docs who already quit. We still had out-hospital privileges and we knew the system. We were willing to help, but only for incentive pay, much more than our usual compensation. I had planned on going on a vacation before starting my new job, but I couldn't pass up the financial windfall of all those incentives. Let's just say it was a very profitable holiday season for me. These cost-saving measures ended up being tremendously expensive for the hospital. Between hiring paying tenens doctors, incentive pay and recruitment costs, the hospital ended up spending way more than it otherwise would have. The hospital admin has quietly rolled back all the changes, and now they have in fact increased the number of doctors per shift. Don't shed a tear for the hospital or admin though. They're still doing tremendously well for themselves. Your bosses made a huge mistake when they decided to save money. They got what they deserved. I'm glad you got a lot more money after the situation. And it was right that you agreed to more pay for your work. The healthcare system I worked in did the same thing but with nurses. Why are we paying ward nurses as much as some general practitioners? We have a cool idea. Let's redo the job descriptions and hire new graduates or less expensive nurses to work in the ICU. We'll save a whole lot of money. 3 lawsuits for physician error, a lawsuit from the union, and a lot of community pressure made a difference. Now we have to pay a lot of money to make someone work for us. Word travels fast. I think you would say we've been blacklisted. No one wants to work for us. I think as long as everything is set up and working well, it's not worth changing anything and creating new problems for ourselves. The last story is, you can't use an accent. After you've taken a couple hundred calls, a week or two of work really, it can get boring, and boredom leads to finding ways to entertain yourself. One of my coworkers decided that he was going to entertain himself by putting on an accent to see how the customers reacted. While I admit he chose poorly, he decided to imitate an Indian accent and started taking calls. He was loving it. After a call or two, however, his team lead overheard him and asked what he was doing and told him to stop. The next day, an email was sent out forbidding us from using anything other than our natural accents while we were on the phone. Now I was living in South Texas at the time and have a fairly average American accent with a bit of Texan mixed in. But I have family in East Texas and Central and Northeast Arkansas. And when I was little, I spoke like them, and so I had an idea. The next day, my opening went from, "Thank you for calling Ticket Nation customer service. This is Astralegium. How may I help you today?" to "Thank you for calling Ticket Nation customer service. This is Astralegium. How can I help you today?" Needless to say, I was quickly noticed and pulled off the phones by my team lead. He asked me if I had read the email, which I confirmed, and then he went on to ask why, if I had read the email, I was using an accent. The look of utter confusion on his face when I told him I'm not was priceless. After a bit of back and forth, I told him that I was raised speaking like I had been on those calls, and that the accent that they were used to hearing me take calls in was in fact not my natural accent. And since I didn't want to get written up, I had complied by reverting to the one that was. He wasn't sure how to respond at first, and even went to speak with the manager above him, but kept me off the phones while he figured out how they wanted to proceed. A few minutes later, they came back and told me that they wanted me to go back to my professional accent, but I told them that it would be setting a bad example to the rest of the team, since we don't want anyone using an accent that isn't their natural accent either. They were stumped on how to proceed and sent me back to the phones. I continued to take calls with my natural accent after that, and a few of my peers started noticing, and a few of them even joined in by abandoning their Americanized accents in favor of their native Mexican accents. It was glorious. In the end, management decided to roll back the rule and only asked us to keep in one accent throughout the call, and not to use an accent that's derogatory or demeaning. I went back to my normal accent, and my teammate went back to using a different accent on each call. Thinking back on it, I should have invited him to my D&D group. He would have made a great dungeon master. Edit. I wanted to say for those who have pointed out to the other agent was being racist, that I was simply playing along or trying to make things worse, that you're absolutely right that he was being racist, and management was trying to respond to that. However, there were agents who were being punished for not having a native accent, that their usually white team leads felt was professional enough. They were using the rule as a reason to issue write-ups to agents using an accent that wasn't so heavy because, I've heard you talk, and that's not how you're talking on the phone. Yes, there were better ways of addressing this to my superiors. I especially know this as I've since become a team lead myself, but then I wouldn't have been posting it here. Cheers. Edit 2. My frame of reference at the time was with the large percentage of workers in my center that were going to be forced to use their native accents from Mexico, which was being enforced by a couple of the white TLs, and tanking their surveys. When I started to move up, one of my goals was to work with as many agents as I could to help them find verbiage that worked for them, and a large portion of that was helping people either learn ways of saying things more clearly, or more preferably, choosing their words to ensure that they left little ambiguity, so they could continue to speak in whatever accent they felt most comfortable presenting on the phone. I've worked in stores for a long time and have encountered similar situations. This story made me smile, but it's so weird that your team leads made you speak in your native accent. I used to work in a tech store. I'm from Europe and moved to America. I had an accent, but I knew the language very well. One day, Karen came to us. She came up to me and asked about a product she wanted to buy. I answered her and she didn't like my accent. She told me to get somebody else who was American. We had a dude from India on our team, and he had an even bigger accent than me. I told him about the Karen and he agreed to serve her. When she heard his accent, she started screaming that we were making fun of her and ran out of the store. I love MCs like that. No harm done, just wreaking as much havoc as possible by following the letter of the law and sending the lawmakers into a well-deserved spin. No accent should be off limits, as long as it's done respectfully in good faith. Well done. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell button